good evening, and welcome into my humble little podcast. I'm David Schuster, and tonight we're joined very shortly by a good and longtime friend of mine, Mr. Bruce Levine. We'll get to Bruce in just a moment. We're going to talk a lot. I'm up to here with the Bears and football, but we got to touch on them for at least a minute before we bring Bruce in. They came from ahead to lose today, the final game of the regular season. They lost up in Minnesota. I think the final was 31-17. They had the lead and they pissed it away in the second half as Kirk Cousins, who was god-awful in the first half, ended up throwing a bunch of touchdown passes in the second half. And I still can't get it out of my mind. Eddie Jackson looking for no, he wasn't looking for the ball. I don't know what he was looking for, but there was a touchdown over his head. The Bears finished the regular season at 6-11, and I think today was pretty much a microcosm of the Bears season. Idiotic play calling, and I have to underline idiotic play calling. They had 4th and 1 on 3 different occasions, twice right by the goal line. And instead of kicking field goals, which I'm okay with, go for the touchdown, obviously. But he threw the ball in all 3 occasions. Twice he was sacked. Once he threw an interception. And this is all play calling. I don't know if Matt Nagy was calling the plays or somebody else. But listen, he's the head coach. He's a terrible, terrible offensive-minded coach, even though that's what his forte was. Hopefully, underline hopefully, today was the final day that you will see Matt Nagy going up and down the sidelines, up and down the sidelines. I'm sort of sick of his pacing. We'll get to Ryan Pace in just a second also, but pretty sure that this was the final thing for Matt Nagy as being head coach of the Chicago Bears. He has a winning record overall, but that doesn't mean anything. He won no playoff games in his 4 seasons here. Ryan Pace, no playoff wins in his 7 seasons here, and I would not trust him to hire anybody else. Hopefully Ryan Pace is out of here. Ryan Pace gave over $100 million to a bunch of quarterbacks, of which none of them did anything. And, you know, the one from last week with the Giants, Mike Glennon, he gave him $18.5 million for 4 games. The defensive backs, like I said, with Eddie Jackson, look for the freaking ball. It's right in your face. But he didn't. And so the Bears lose again today. No offense. Ryan Pace should be going. Matt Nagy definitely should be going. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to have meetings tomorrow up at Hallis Hall. Basically like end of year things for the different players. Then supposedly Nagy and or Pace will meet with upper management, upper ownership, I should say, and that's George McCaskey. I don't know if Virginia will be part of that. I hope, hopefully she's not put through that. And then they'll come up with some kind of decision. Hopefully the decision's been made. I would not anticipate there's going to be any pink slips for either Ryan Pace or Matt Nagy tomorrow. But I think Tuesday will be D-Day as far as the Bears go. So if you want to talk about the Bears at all, you could just send in your comments right here. And Harry Berg, who is our producer this evening, he will certainly put them up on the screen here. Again, the Bears, thank God their season's over because they were just god-awful all season long. Okay. I just had to get that out of my system real quickly. Now, let's change to something a little bit happier, even though right now there's no baseball, and I'm not sure there will be on time for this season. But let's bring in my longtime and good friend, Mr. Bruce Levine. You can follow him on Twitter, as I do, at MLB Bruce Levine. And Bruce, you want to say anything? You want to rant about the Bears real quickly before we get to something a little bit happier?
Yeah, David, I mean, I understand where people are disenchanted with the general manager and the coach, but I would lay it more on the general manager. I don't see the talent there. Honestly, except for a couple of linebackers and a couple of defensive linemen, I don't see the talent. I think the secondary, and I know there's injuries, of course, but I think the secondary was shown today to be one of the worst in the NFL. The way that Minnesota went through them in the second half, I think it was embarrassing. So I'm more concerned about the general manager than I am about the coach. You had 3 quarterbacks. Fields has a chance maybe to be a good quarterback at some point, but he wasn't a good quarterback this year. I think that's what the point is that when you look at him, he showed flashes. He's a wonderful athlete, and he showed flashes of being able to find his receivers. But how many sacks did he take? I think when he went out the first time, he was leading the NFL in quarterbacks being sacked. So there's a lot of this was an experimental year with a new young quarterback. I don't think I don't think 6 or 7 wins should be surprising to anybody.
No, actually, I picked them at 7-10, so they are even underperformed my expectations. But Matt Nagy in his first year, he was coach of the year. They finished 12-4 when they only had a 16-game schedule, and he was, as I said, coach of the year. But that was against a pretty easy schedule. And honestly, that year their defense really dominated for them. Vic Fangio, who was fired today out in Denver, he really was the main coach of that team that season. But here's what I say about Matt Nagy. Really nice guy, by the way, but sorry, nice guys, as Leo DeRocher once said, Bruce, finished last. And though the Bears didn't finish last, they certainly haven't done anything in the postseason. And you can identify with this analogy. Do you remember when James Shields was picked up by the White Sox in a trade? In his last game in San Diego, he was destroyed. He gave up like about 9, 10 runs in an inning and a third. Okay. And that's how I looked at Matt Nagy, even when he first came here. Because if you go back and you take a look, he was the offensive coordinator for Kansas City when they were in the playoffs, and they had a big lead going into the second half, and then he just basically shit the bed in the second half as the offensive coordinator, and then the Bears hired him. Well, you know what? You always sometimes, like I said with Shields, I would have never have made that Shields trade until I saw him pitch at least one more game just to make sure that he wasn't as garbage as he was that game. Unfortunately, he was even worse when he came to the White Sox. And Matt Nagy, unfortunately, proved as a head coach with play calling was just as bad as he was with Kansas City. So, again, nice guy. Ryan Pace, I agree with you, Bruce. Ryan Pace, to me, is even more culpable than Matt Nagy was overall. And I would hope that they're both gone. And yes, I know I heard all the things from the fans. Well, do you trust George McCaskey to, find somebody else? No, actually, I don't. But George McCaskey is an owner, and he should consult with other owners to find the right general manager who will then find the right coach. Ryan Pace was a junior executive with the New Orleans Saints. They took a stab at him. He didn't do the job here. No playoff wins in 7 years. Not good enough for me. Not good enough should be for anybody. And so both of them should be gone, but time will tell.
Well, David, you identified the problem, and that is everybody that knows the McCaskey family knows that they're really fine people. I got to know them, 25, 30 years ago when I covered the Bears for 50.
And Bruce, we lost your sound. If you can come closer once again to the screen.
Can you hear me now, David?
Yeah, we're having some technical problems. Hopefully, Bruce, hopefully Bruce will come through. I don't know what it is tonight, Bruce. I'm not sure. Anyway, I don't really know what to say here in this instance.
Say goodbye.
Hopefully, I don't want to say goodbye to you, Bruce.
If you can't hear me, it's a problem.
Shane, come back, Shane.
Why don't we try to reestablish?
Well, no, it sounds better if you get just a little bit closer.
If I get any closer, I'm going to be kissing.
There we go. Okay, well, listen, you're not my type, but in this instance, I'll take what I can get. No, honestly, I think the closer you get sometimes, or I don't know what it is. Let's just keep trying. And let's switch to baseball because that's at least a happier topic. Although the first question I'm going to throw at you is not really happy. These two sides, the owners and the players are not talking at the moment, Bruce. I'm sure that's calculated on both sides. It's a game of chicken at this point. I've heard from a lot of experts, including yourself, that there could be a delay in the season at the very least. What's the latest from your end?
Well, neither side are talking right now. I mean, they're not. They don't even have anything scheduled at this point. And they had one meeting since December 1st when the owners declared the lockout. They had a meeting on December 17th to talk about ancillary issues. That's it, ancillary issues. Like how many suites do guys have? How many free trips for their families do they get in their contracts? So things that are not important issues. The important issues about 5-year free agency, 2-year as far as salary arbitration, expanded playoffs on the owner's side, the ability for young players to get paid between years 1 and 3 with higher minimum salaries before they go to arbitration. none of those have been figured out, and both sides seem to be kind of locked in right now. They got their heels in the sand and they're not moving. And for the life of me, I don't understand how they feel that they're going to have more leverage, one side or the other, as they move on. The threat of missing some spring training or regular season games, it's not a very smart idea considering fans in the stands were non-existent in 2020. Only half of a year last year. A lot of people forget until the end of June you didn't have full stands of people. So you really haven't had full fan participation since 2019. And to take them for granted and think that they might not find something else to do other than go to baseball games is the height of arrogancy for me, for both sides.
That's really comical when you say that they're only worrying about the ancillary stuff. To me, that's like going to buy a car and you're dealing with the windshield wipers or the cigarette lighter and the ashtray, but you're not worrying about the overall price of the whole car. I mean, these people are such fools, but they must feel like, again, and this happens every time the two sides break down, that one of the two sides is going to cave in. I mean, what's the thinking among, experts like yourself? Who's going to cave in? When are they going to cave in?
Well, nobody seems to know because nobody's losing money right now, David. I mean, you can say the owners are losing money because they're not selling tickets in the off season like they normally do, or they're not selling merchandising. None of the merchandise, MLB merchandise, is being sold. They're not selling a lot of advertising because people don't want to talk about advertising when there's no real idea when the season might start. So they're being hurt on that end. The players on the other side, if it goes a long time and it goes till, let's say, the end of February and spring training is either short or extended into the regular season, then all of a sudden you got 100 free agents who don't have jobs. Some of them thinking they're going to get $30 million contracts for 10 years are going to have to really hustle to get any contracts at all. And the middle range players, the guys that are getting pushed out because of escalating prices for the superstars, and teams now more interested in paying young players the minimum rather than paying the middle class. The middle class of baseball is getting pushed out. It might sound familiar to people that have lived in the United States over the last 10 years and watched the middle class, whatever it was, totally dissipate. So, real life as a citizen is being imitated by baseball right now as they begin to lose their middle class.
Tourism in the states of Florida and Arizona has taken a hit, obviously, during the COVID time anyway. Can you just imagine what a lot of those businesses, even more so maybe in Arizona, or I'm sure Florida's the same, what some of those businesses are probably thinking, that spring training's not going to happen and people are not going to be coming out there? They must be pulling their hairs out.
Well, I think they are, and again, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent in Florida and Arizona during spring training when people come there to watch the games and stay in hotels and go to the best restaurants and go to some of the not best restaurants and rental cars and everything else that you can imagine from tourism, which is huge in both states, as you mentioned. So uh, that's taking a hit right now. Look, even reporters like myself, and nobody really cares about us, as you know, David. But I don't have any plans right now. Normally, I'd have a place. I'd have a place for 6 weeks, all set right now. I can't make a plan to go. I don't know when spring training is going to start. So they're really messing around with this thing. You know, again, nobody cares about us reporters, but I do care about the fans uh, making their plans ahead of time, wanting to get out of the weather, wanting to see their teams, and not knowing when they can go and get their tickets and feel good about it because you don't know if spring training is going to be cut short or out altogether until April.
All right. Well, upcoming, Bruce, we have our trivia segment. I know you always enjoy that. And we have our walk down memory lane segment, of which you and I were personally involved and the one that I have written down here today. But let's pretend that the baseball season is going. Let's pretend that these dumbbells, millionaire players, billionaire owners are going to get their shit together, and the season will start on time. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at our two teams here in Chicago and sort of take a look down the road and see how they might perform during the season. The Cubs, I will say right now, are a better team now than they were at the end of last season because their pitching staff got better. I never thought that Marcus Stroman would be a Cub player, but for whatever his reason, and he's getting paid. He signed with the Cubs, so he made their starting staff obviously better right off the bat. Wade Miley, they got for $10 million or whatever it is. I don't think he's the greatest pitcher on earth, but he's coming off a pretty good season for Cincinnati. I think Kyle Hendricks will get better than he was for the most part last season. So with those three guys, at least you got the makings of a decent starting staff. You can throw in a Mills or an Alzolay. I don't know if Braylon Marquez is anywhere near ready to be, join the staff, but starting with pitching, Bruce, I think the Cubs are better now than they were in October of last calendar year.
Well, and you also have Steele and Thompson that showed a little bit from both the right and the left side of young pitchers. Finally, along with Alzolay, coming through the system for the first time in a million years, certainly for the first time since the Epstein-Hoyer and now the Hoyer regime is in place. And that's a pleasant sight to see that you have good arms that have the ability to start some games and maybe jump into their rotation. But, the Cubs have to, they still have to solidify their bullpen. They have a couple arms out there. They have Wick out there. They have Hoyer out there. Good arms. Not established guys. Wick was hurt for over a year. Hoyer came over from the White Sox and looked good. I think Hoyer got a little bit overused by the end of the year. They have good arms out there, but as far as bullpen depth, if you're going to go out and get a Stroman, and you're going to have Hendricks and you're going to have Miley, you're going to win that. You're going to try to win that division. You're not going to win that division unless you add some more bullpen depth, and that's where they're going to have to go. Whether they get themselves a top shortstop like Correa or not. They're going to need more pieces, probably a lot more pieces to be able to be competitive. But you're like me, David. Once they signed Stroman, that gave me a whole different feel about where they're going and how quickly they want to get there. And that's why I think they're very serious contenders for Carlos Correa once this thing gets settled.
Well, let's talk about Correa in just a moment. And yes, for me, it's pitching, pitching, pitching. It's always about pitching. Right now, the Cubs infield, as is right now, you got Schwindel at first. You got Wisdom at third. Both guys coming off, Schwindel was really consistent all season long. I never thought that was possible, but he was. Wisdom obviously hit a ton of home runs. He also strikes out a ton. That's his MO going forward. I think, in essence, maybe both these guys are stopgaps until somebody else takes their positions. But for right now, that's what it is. You got Madrigal, who I still like a lot. I wish the White Sox would have been able to hold on to him, but they didn't. He's going to be your second baseman for the next decade. As of right now, it's Horner at shortstop. But you mentioned Carlos Correa. Listen, you add him to a lineup, now you become a pretty serious contending kind of team. The problem is, he wants 10 years, supposedly, Bruce, at $330 million. And if I'm the Cubs, I don't think I'm doing that.
Well, on my show with David Haw and The Score every Saturday, we've talked this week about the fact that the Cubs and Correa can get something done and be creative. And what do I mean by creative? So they don't want to sign him to a 10-year deal. I don't think anybody wants to sign him to a 10-year deal. He's had back issues. He's only played over 110 games, I think, twice in his career over the 6+ years that he's been in baseball. Still only 27 years old. So that's a good thing. A 7-year contract that could be exactly what he wants, averaging over $30 million a year, with a higher average salary the first 2 years than Mike Trout, putting him at somewhere around 35 or 36 million for the first 2 years, going down the scale the last five, and also giving him an option to walk away after the second year. So you would have the best of all worlds. You would have one of the top defensive shortstops, one of the more prolific playoff shortstops over the next 2 years, guaranteed. He would be the highest paid player in baseball for those 2 years. And he could walk away after the second year, and if you give him the right to walk away, and at the same time, you have him signed for a contract less than 10 years, averaging about $30 million, $32 million a year, and within the framework of the Cubs format and their payroll, it's something they can afford very easily at this point in time. Now, if he breaks down and he stays with you for those last 5 years, you're stuck. You have a kind of a Jason Hayward contract where great guy, wonderful defender, but not getting the production you want. You can still get stuck with that contract, but that is a way to kind of satisfy everybody in this type of situation and make it a workable one.
Yeah, it's going to have to be a creative contract to reel him in from his end also, but also from the Cubs end, because correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce. I mean, they're very, very young. They might be 18 or 19 or 20 years old, but the Cubs do have like three young shortstops in their system. So, whatever creative contract with outs, if I'm going to reel in Correa, I want to make sure that I have outs on my end as well, just in case these kids fly up through the farm system. They can save me a ton of money, number one, but also they might be, the things to build around down the road.
Right. Well, the beauty of it is that it's a lock that there's going to be a DH in the National League.
True.
So when you have a player who's had some injuries, or if you want to rest him 25 times a year and have him as a DH, just to keep his bat in the lineup, you're going to have that ability. A lot of people think he'll eventually have to move to third base or whatever, but again, you're talking about a platinum glove winner last year, the best defensive player in the National League. So there's a lot to like about Correa. There's a lot to worry about, including too long of a contract and injuries that have kept him away from playing all the games over the last 6 years.
All right, we talked about the bullpen. You did maybe being a little bit of an Achilles heel, or certainly one of the weaker parts of that franchise right now. The outfield isn't very strong either. Right now, if the season were to start today, it would be Happ, Ortega, and Hayward maybe, and maybe Clint Frazier playing out there periodically also. But you mentioned the DH, Bruce, and there's a free agent who used to be a Cub player, and I'm not talking about Rizzo, and I'm not talking about Bryant. How about Kyle Schwarber as a possibility, maybe returning to the Cubs on a deal that's good for both sides, considering that the DH is coming to the National League?
I like that idea. I like the idea of the left-handed bat. I don't think it helps you defensively in an outfield that is not very good defensively. I mean, you're talking about, with all due respect, a real subpar offensive and defensive outfield as it stands right now. Hayward, once a great defensive outfielder, is still a good one, but has lost a step along the way. Ortega is not a great center fielder. Happ is not a great outfielder. And bringing Schwarber in to be an outfielder, okay, you said DH, fine. I think his power bat would be great. I think you would make the fans very happy by bringing him back, and I think he has 3 or 4 or 5 years of hitting 35 to 45 home runs in him going forward, especially if the DH is there in the National League. So I think that's something to consider and look at, but they have to really get themselves. You're talking about Davis being like a year away in center field. that's a you know that's their hope, is that Brendan Davis is their center fielder by the end of 2022 or early 2023. But in the meantime, you need an ass kicking center fielder defensively. You need an ass kicking shortstop defensively if you're going to compete.
Well, you must have overlooked my notes here because I did underline Brennan Davis as my next question. I mean, obviously, this kid tore it up in the minors last year at every level that he played at. I mean, I'm excited. I want to see this kid. And it reminds me that when Bryant and Rizzo and Baez were flying through the Cubs farm system, I couldn't wait to see. I mean, I couldn't care about the teams that were playing in Wrigley at the time because they were terrible, but I couldn't wait to see those kids, and they finally erupted at the major league level. I'm pretty confident that Brennan Davis might duplicate or maybe even surpass any of those guys.
Well, he's got all the tools. He's a really good outfielder. He's got power. He's got a good arm. He can run. I mean, when was the last time the Cubs developed a center fielder? Scratch your head, think twice, and then, I mean,
Adolfo Phillips, I don't even know.
right? I mean, it's just, you know, it hasn't happened for decades. So, I mean, they've had good center fielders that have come in trades from time to time, but certainly not developed in their system. Maybe since Doug Glanville, and he had his better years in Philadelphia than he did in Chicago.
All right, one last one on the Cubs before we switch sides of town. Wilson Contreras, another big question mark. I mean, obviously, he's got one last year, I think it is, on his contract, Bruce, if I'm not mistaken. So
Right.
I don't know what's their thinking. I mean, maybe sign him. I mean, they signed somebody else in the offseason, but that's not good enough for me. Are they going to hold him as trade bait pending on what happens in the regular season up until the trading deadline? What is the MO on his part and their part?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they know. I know, getting Yan Gomes, he's a very good catcher. He's been in the league for a long time. He's 35 years old, but he's held up well. They signed him to a 2-year contract to kind of solidify that in case they do find that Contreras won't sign a long-term deal and they either trade him or he walks after 2022. It just depends how reasonable they want to be on each side. Uh, again, Contreras is one of the top catchers in the game, whether you like the way he frames pitches or not. We saw a great indication last year in all the games when he didn't catch, and they used those other 7 catchers that they had, and we saw disasters in almost every one of those games because there wasn't any leadership behind the plate. And if one thing we learned was that Contreras brings a lot of peace and quiet and calm to the game. A great arm, of being able to settle down pitchers. Yeah, maybe he doesn't frame pitches as well as they always wanted him to, but he's a much improved catcher who still has tremendous power. And he's a guy, David, that would really benefit from the DH. If you can imagine him catching only maybe 110 games and Gomes catching the other 50, and having Contreras' fresher bat off the bench or as a DH for 25 or 30 games, I think he would be a much better player going forward.
Real quickly before we get to the White Sox, Bruce. I mean, we've talked about the DH a couple of times here. The two sides, the owners and the players, still have to negotiate. Is that going to be on the table? I mean, it should be like right away. My estimation, it should be for this coming season, whenever the season starts. Is that part of the thinking, at least from the owner's side?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be negotiated, but I mean, it's a win-win for the players and the owners. For the owners, it gives them another position that they can have a power hitter, and they don't have to watch their pitchers try to hit, which is just ridiculous now, especially after 2020 and them not swinging the bat and then coming back last year and swinging the bat. It's just a joke. But for both sides, it's a win-win going forward. So I think it'll be negotiated. It's something that both sides really want, because the players want it because it adds usually a guy that makes a high salary in that position.
All right, let's switch to the other side of town. We talked about earlier pitching, pitching, pitching. It's still the White Sox strong point, although it let them down in that series against Houston. I mean, their pitching their pitching was the worst all season long in those games against Houston, unfortunately. But they still go into the season with that being a strong point. Lance Lynn, hopefully he slims down a little bit in my estimation, but he's still really good, obviously. Lucas Giolito, Dylan Cease, I think, is only going to get better and better. I really do believe that. Dallas Keuchel, I mean, hopefully he wants to redeem himself. He had a terrible season last year. And Michael Kopech, I'm confident, Bruce, Michael Kopech will be as good as a lot of people think that he will be. I really do believe this kid's got good stuff. If his head is straight, that's a question mark. He could be really, really good. They're going to lose Carlos Rodon. He's obviously not coming back. Is that how you see their pitching staff as well?
Yeah, I think Lopez will be backing all those guys up as well. He showed signs of coming back to being a better pitcher last year. Has a better, pace about him and a better way of being able to see home plate after having some eye surgery. So I think you don't throw him out of the mix. Kopech's going to be fascinating to watch as a starting pitcher. Personally, I think that he's a dominant bullpen pitcher in the future, but they're going to use him as a starting pitcher. Um, his ball is hard to pick up. He has a dominant fastball, as we know, around 100 miles an hour. Good breaking ball. Needs to continue to work on his changeup. Once he does that, I think he's got a possibility of being a 150, 160 inning pitcher for them next year. And what I saw of him, I loved last year. I thought he pitched great for him, but shooting from 69 innings to 140 or 150, teams hesitate. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him and whether they can get a full season out of him. 6 or 7 innings times 30 is that's right near 200, and the new number is more 175 rather than 200. That's what they look for from starting pitchers because of the use of the bullpens and how things have changed the way teams go about trying to win games.
I don't think there's any question they're going to baby Kopech all season, but specifically early on in the season. I don't think and who knows when the season even starts. The bullpen, it's another strong point. I mean, Liam Hendricks is coming off maybe the best reliever in the major leagues last year. I mean, he was that good. Obviously, Garrett Crochet, and he's still got great stuff. He's got to command, his pitches a little bit better. Aaron Bummer, the exact same thing. His command is all, what's in front of him. I don't know much about Kendall Graveman. You're going to have to fill in the blanks for me on him. And then the wild card is still Kimbrel. I mean, what do you do? Everybody has thought that he's a trade piece. Do you get a second baseman for him? Do you get a right fielder for him? Although I do like Gavin Sheets to be my right fielder. I'm sort of jumping ahead, but what are your thoughts on any of those things?
Well, Graveman is a really good pitcher, a really good bullpen piece. He should be primary setup man from the right side, with Bummer being on the left side as primary guy. I'm looking for Bummer to have a better season than he had. It was kind of wonky for him last year. He showed signs of being the dominant pitcher he was, and other times just not the same command that he had. But Graveman is top of the line and should, coming over. He was with 2 teams last year, pitched great, and I think that was a very good sign by them. As far as Kimbrel goes, they made no bones about telling people they're going to trade him. Okay, as to when and to where, is it spring training when somebody loses a top closer or a back end pitcher in their bullpen? Wherever he goes, everybody knows he's got to be the closer. Okay, he's not going to do anything as a setup man. He's not mentally prepared to be a setup man. He's mentally prepared to be somebody's closer. So, how creative the White Sox want to be? Can they get a second baseman for him from somebody? Can they get a a solid number 3 or 4 pitcher or a young pitcher that they like that they can bring along either in the bullpen or as a starter uh, remains to be seen. To me, it was a gamble, uh, picking up the option on the contract. $16 million is a lot of money. We know that Kimbrel was for the first 4 months with the Cubs probably the equal or maybe even a little better than what Hendricks was. Once he went to the White Sox, it was a disaster.
He was. All right, the outfield, real quickly for the Sox. I mean, Eloy, hopefully he doesn't injure himself, but when he finally came back from the injury, he is actually a better defensive fielder. They're not great, but better when he finally came back. Luis Robert is, I'm telling you, Bruce, I just think he's going to be a superstar. I think he's that good. And again, they have possibilities in right field. They can alternate between Gavin Sheets and Andrew Vaughn. Both of them are really solid offensive hitters. I like Sheets because he hits from the left-hand side. He's got power. Surprisingly, I thought he had pretty good control of the bat. He can go the opposite way at times also. So I'm not really worried about who they're going to play in right field because I think they have a couple of pretty good options out there.
Well, and both of them are first basemen too. So is this the year that Abreu goes to DH? I mean,
Could
he's
be.
starting to get up there. He's 35 years old, and believe it or not, David, it's his walk year. It's the last year of
Yeah.
a 3-year deal he signed for somewhere around $50 million, and at some point he's probably going to need a rest to get the most out of him. So I really like those two players too. Sheets had some huge hits from the left side for them when they brought him back finally in late August and September, and Vaughn was on a pace to be a Rookie of the Year candidate before he faded in August and had a little bit of a back injury. So I like them both very much. A lot of people are saying that the White Sox have to go and get a right fielder, sign a Castellanos. I don't see that happening, honestly. But second base, they really need some help at second base. They need a second baseman.
Hey, Bruce, before we get to those two segments I was talking about, a couple of things, and I know you wanted to talk about the ESPN broadcast. We'll get to that next, but the Hall of Fame announcement will be coming up in, I think it's 2 weeks from Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, last time out on the regular list, they were both at 61%. I don't think either one's going to get to 75 in my estimation, unless you told me otherwise. Big Papi's on there, David Ortiz. He made a lot of fans in the sports writing community over the years. I mean, you tell me if you think that's good enough. Alex Rodriguez, first time on the list. And Sammy, last time on the list for him. He ain't getting in this way. What are your thoughts on any of those?
Well, it's really difficult. I had a Hall of Fame vote for the first time, David, this year, and it was really something I looked forward to being able to do. And once I got that ballot, I kind of really regretted it because it was really hard to decide if I would vote for anybody that I assumed did steroids. Okay. But because people like Pudge Rodriguez and Mike Piazza and others that I won't mention are already known or assumed, I can't say known, but certainly assumed users of performance enhancing drugs. Uh, how hypocritical can you be? I mean, is it really, are you going to keep these guys out of there when you know the other guys that use this stuff are already in there? Uh, it kind of changed the way I looked at things. I mean, it was like at the end of the day, it's still a museum, okay? And the best players that played in the game should be remembered. I'm all for having an asterisk for the steroids era on the bottom of a lot of the plaques or all of them. I mean, just reminding people that different things were used. But I saw Barry Bonds before he used a drug. I saw Clemens before he used a drug. They were Hall of Famers before they did it, and on that, I voted for both of them. Did I hesitate because I know they did cheat? Yeah, I did. It bothered me, and I called other Hall of Famers that I know to ask them their opinions about it, and they were mixed. They were mixed. Some said no, and talked to my friend Greg Maddox and said, "Hey, what do you think?" He said, "Well, they cheated, but they were both Hall of Fame caliber players before any of us thought they were ever cheated." So, with that in mind, I voted for both of them.
Let me just ask you this because I'm sort of digressing. P. Rose was a cheat in a lot of ways. Would you vote for him if he was on the thing?
I would say he was beyond cheat. But how hypocritical can we be now? The Chicago Cubs, the Chicago White Sox will have their own casino starting in 2022 and 2023. Those casinos will be 365 days a year for you to come into um, guaranteed rate or Wrigley Field to be able to gamble on other sports as well. Uh, DraftKings has given the Cubs a huge amount of money to be the sponsor. So when you look at Pete Rose now, even though he did a lot of things that were pretty bad, if it's strictly on gambling, do you really feel like you can keep them out of a sport that promotes gambling now? I mean, it kind of changes the narrative for Pete Rose.
Yeah, well, I think you and I have had this conversation many times over the years. If ever we saw a Hall of Famer play right in front of our own eyes, it was Pete Rose as a player, of course.
Right.
And I've always said, put him in the Hall of Fame, put on his plaque that he was a scumbag, yada, yada, yada. You know, criticize the F out of him. But he was a Hall of Fame player. That's all I know. And by the way, Bruce, when we went to the Cooperstown for the last time we went to the Hall of Fame, Pete Rose was all over that damn building with his artifacts and his records and everything else. So you know what? Put him in the goddamn Hall of Fame. Gee whiz. My
Well,
opinion.
you and I went over and interviewed him at one of those places that he
Yes.
was signing, and it was an odd interview in an odd place with his limited entourage waiting in the background.
His girlfriend or wife or whatever she was somewhere in the background also. We went into the back of a bookstore or something, if I remember correctly. It was weird. That was weird. That's not even my walk down memory lane segment. But we'll talk about that in a moment. But you also wanted to talk about the change, what ESPN is going to be doing with the baseball broadcast this year. So go ahead.
Yeah, so Vescurgian and Rodriguez are out as the main broadcasters. Vescurgian asked for being out. Now it's going to be Carl Ravitch, and it's going to be Eduardo Perez, and it's going to be David Cohn doing Sunday nights. But there'll be an alternative broadcast, just like the Manning one in that the NFL used. It's going to be the alternative is going to be A Rod and Michael Kay, the Yankees television broadcaster for the last 25 years. And when I was talking to David Haw on our show on the Score on Saturday, he said, "Well, I'm never going to watch A Rod. You know, nobody wants to watch him." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "I like the Manning alternative broadcast a lot." And what ESPN is going to do is they're going to bring guests in for both of those guys to join them. And I'm going to be fascinated to watch A Rod and Michael Kay talk to some other people during the broadcast, not doing play by play, being able to follow the game and also listening to people, just kind of cutting up a little bit, maybe talking, entertainment, maybe talking pop culture, maybe talking, with people like Kevin Costner for 2 hours. I think it could be fascinating. I think A Rod is being undersold in that position. I think he's the perfect guy for that because he's America's guest, and he floats from place to place. He goes up and back between the entertainment business and baseball business very seamlessly. Even though a lot of people hate him, there's a lot of Howard Cosell type thing going on with A Rod.
Well, I think he also bought into the Minnesota Timberwolves basketball team, if I'm not mistaken, also, so he can delve into that area also. But if the producer of that broadcast has any sense of humor, Bruce, the very first guest should be Jennifer Lopez.
Absolutely. If they're talking, we don't know if they're talking or not. So if they're talking,
It'd be better if they're
I'd
not.
like to see it. I would like to see it if they're not talking, and maybe they have a little bit of a dust up. I mean, those are the type of things that I think, people sitting for 3.5 hours watching a baseball game. I used to be a purist of baseball, but I can't sit there for 4 hours without being bored with the rest of the people right now, the way the game's being played. So give me a Sunday night alternative with the baseball game in the background. I can keep up with it, and also have some chit chat going on. Some cutting up of baseball people. Maybe A Rod will be giving some. Maybe he'll be going after people. I think it could be intriguing. I think it's underrated right now.
I agree. All right. Walk down memory lane segment. Actually, I had one written down, but when I was thinking about Cooperstown, Bruce, I thought about that same trip when we went. It was for when Maddox and Frank Thomas, I think, both went into the Hall of Fame. We were out there.
The three managers,
That's right.
Thomas
And
and Cooper's.
we did the broadcast, what was it, Saturday afternoon? I think the inductions were Sunday, but we did the broadcast on Saturday morning. And boy, did we pull it off at the last minute because neither one of us really knew what we were doing for getting it technically set up, but we finally did. And if I remember correctly, also, it was raining pretty good that morning. Anyway, it was Panic City, sort of, but we pulled it out at the last minute. Am I recollecting it the same way?
Yeah, there were thunderstorms in the area. We were under a tent that had metal poles. Okay, so that was the angst that we were. They were having pretty heavy rains and then thunderstorms. We didn't want to get electrocuted. That was our goal, not to die in the back of the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. That was my goal, not to get fried there. So we did pull it off. It was a lot of fun. Uh, you and me and my dear friend who's passed away, Rick, and his son-in-law, we went to the Boxing Hall of Fame, and we enjoyed that. Probably maybe even more than the Hall of Fame because we didn't have as much time in there. And then on our way home, Rick and I and his son-in-law uh, went to the Football Hall of Fame in Canton. We stopped off there, so we made it a trip to remember for sure.
Yeah, that's a trifecta if ever there was one. Actually, the other walk down memory lane segment, you and I were covering. It was the Cubs and Giants the year they won the whole thing, but it was the NLDS when they were playing out in San Francisco. The Cubs winning that series in 4 games, and you and I went one afternoon. We had lunch on Fisherman's Wharf. And why don't you tell everybody who we ran into at Fisherman's Wharf?
Well, we ran into Chris Bryant's parents and his mother-in-law, and they were taking a nice walk. It was a nice day, and we stood there and talked to Mike Bryant, his dad, for I don't know. We probably talked for 15 or 20 minutes, and it was fun. It was interesting. It's one of those stories where they say, "Hey, Bruce, write a book about the 40 years, but don't give us those same old stories. We want to hear the stories that were fun." And talking baseball with Mike Bryan has always been fun. He's a Type A personality. Uh, Him and I talk about Bryant's swing since I met him 7 years ago. Just he's a hitting instructor. That's what he does for a living, and he's a terrific guy. Wonderful family. I thought it was a fun day that day. Are those some of your recollections?
Yeah, absolutely. And we certainly know where he got his very nice manners from because his mother was just a sweetheart of a lady.
Yeah, they're fine people. They really are. I will miss Chris Bryant being in Chicago. He was always a gentleman. Although the last couple of years we haven't had much contact with any players at all, and it's been really difficult for someone like myself, especially. I mean, I don't differentiate between other reporters other than saying if I've had any success at all, it's just in communication with a lot of players and a lot of managers and a lot of coaches for these last 40 years. And that's kind of been the joy of the game for me to get to know these people personally.
Yeah, it's a far cry from what it was before the pandemic, that's for sure. All right, time for our trivia questions, Bruce. Today, I catered all towards White Sox questions. So put on your White Sox thinking cap, and we'll bring in our producer. And I don't want to forget that Harry Berg is doing our production here tonight. And Harry certainly has a show here on 1252 as well. And so we'll bring him in as well to try and answer some of these questions. But here we go. The very first question, Bruce. Shoeless Joe Jackson. I heard he was a pretty good ball player once upon a time. Anyway, he had a bat, and he had a famous name for his bat. What was the name for his famous bat? I think I stumped you both.
Wow.
Was it a color in the name?
Yes.
Black Beauty?
Black
Close.
Betsy. Black Betsy.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't know if this is true.
Point.
Okay, I don't know if this is true or not, but this is what I saw when I looked this up. He sold his no, he didn't sell it, but somebody else apparently, because he had to be long dead by the year 2001. And I don't know if he kept one bat his entire career. I find that hard to believe. But the Black Betsy bat in 2001 at an auction sold for $577,000.
Nice piece of ash.
Isn't that like half a salary for your year, David?
No. You can put a couple of decimal points maybe in there, and maybe, just maybe, I might come close, but no. 577. There's a lot of money in sports paraphernalia, trust me. All right. How about this one?
Yep.
How about this one? The White Sox, Bruce, picked up our good friend Paul Konerko. They got him from the Reds, 1998. Who was the main player the White Sox traded to the Reds to get Konerko?
That would be Mike Cameron.
That is correct. Mike Cameron is correct.
Do you know that, Harry?
No, not even close on that one.
I'm, even though Harry's from the south side of Chicago originally, he lives down in Tampa Bay right now, in the Tampa area. Some of these questions, well, they're all questions about the White Sox. All right, this next one. Bruce, who was the first White Sox player to be the MVP?
Wow.
The first White Sox player to be the most valuable player would be, of course, Nellie Fox in 1950.
That is correct again, Bruce. You're doing very, very good. Yes.
Nellie Fox was my father's favorite, absolute favorite baseball player.
Well, he was a throwback kind of guy who chewed that tobacco and spit it all over the place, and he played hard. 1959, the year they went to the World Series.
It's interesting that year that he was the MVP. I think he hit 8 home runs and drove in close to 90, which is it's pretty amazing how many games he won without being a home run hitter. And he was a terrific second baseman. Aparicio had more range than he had, but he was a 13-time All-Star at second base. And it took him forever to get into the Hall of Fame, which I still can't figure out. They had the Nellie Fox Society that kept bringing it up and up again until he finally got in. But looking back on it, he should have been in the Hall of Fame a lot longer, or a lot pretty
earlier
after he left the game. Yeah.
Number 2 on the uniform. Nellie Fox was a great ball player. All right, who was the first White Sox player to be Rookie of the Year?
You're killing me, Dave.
You go ahead, Harry. You think
no, he's killing me.
I'm
Zero knowledge on this one.
I'm taking Harry too far back.
That was in the same era, David. That would be Luis Aparicio.
Luis Aparicio.
That is correct. Good old number 11.
1956, I believe.
56 is correct.
American League in stolen bases with 56 that year. And what a great career he had. Again, a guy that never hit 300 maybe once or twice in his career, never hit home runs. All he did was be the Ozzie Smith of his time. Just a terrific shortstop with one of the great arms for a guy that was only about 5'9", 5'8", 5'9". Just a terrific player.
Pretty good on the bases too. Had I don't remember how many stolen bases, but he was a pretty good base stealer as well.
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
Funny story, David. My father
Go ahead.
played minor league baseball in the late 50s, and he played for the White Sox organization, which was the Superior Blues up in Superior, Wisconsin. And long story short, I remember he had this baseball that was in a case, and the entire 1959 team had signed it. And he says, I had 4 other brothers and a sister, and he goes, son, someday that baseball is going to be yours. I took that it was mine. Guess what I did with that baseball?
I hope you didn't play with it, did you? Hey.
Yeah,
You know
my
what that
father said
ball
I'm grounded, and I'm still grounded for it. I'm
that ball
55.
nowadays, because I do some work with some sports memorabilia people. That ball would be worth thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Thousands.
Klazuski's on it. I remember Aparicio was on it. I mean, and it, oh my God, he was so mad. God bless my dad. He was so upset.
Probably have 4 Hall of Famers on it. You have
Yep.
Fox, you have Aparicio, you have Al Lopez, and you have Early Wynn.
Yep. Yep.
So
All right. 2 more White Sox questions, Bruce. Larry Doby, White Sox manager in 78, replaced who?
he replaced in 78. Let's see. I would say Bob Lemon.
Boy, you're very consistent tonight, and that is also correct.
Right,
Bob Lemon is
after
correct.
Doby left, Don Kessinger took his spot, and then the Tony La Russa era began after Kessinger was out.
That is correct. And Bob Lemon, if I'm not mistaken, he went on to manage Washington, was it?
He actually, in 77, in between some of those Billy Martin,
Was it with the Yankees?
again, managers, he was a world champion manager with the Yankees, I think.
Oh, I don't remember that part.
There's 77 or 78.
Okay.
One of
All right.
those 2 years, he was their manager.
I got one last one. What White Sox player holds the franchise record for most triples in a game, and how many were there?
Whoa.
I think I know this one. Why do I? Is it
Most
Ventura?
triples in a game. I would say it's Dick Allen.
No, but good guess.
I'm going to say Albert Bell.
Not Albert Bell either. If I give you his
Wait a
nickname,
minute.
you'll
No,
know
wait
it.
a minute. No, wait a minute. It was Shoeless Joe Jackson.
No.
What?
Right. You want to give us
No.
a hint?
If I give you his nickname, you know it in a fraction of a second.
Oh, well.
His nickname was One Dog.
Oh,
God.
okay. So Lance Johnson, of course.
Lance Johnson had 3 triples in a game. That is the franchise record for most in a game. It's funny, Harry. You mentioned Dick Allen.
In a game. I was talking about
Dick Allen. I believe had 2 inside the park home runs in one game.
Yeah,
that is correct.
Someone told me that, and they would have stumped me on that one. I didn't think the guy could run that fast, but someone apparently. And I remember watching Dick Allen. But I always remember Dick Allen for his laser beam shots. They were never tower shots. They were just, line drives out of the stadium. It was just unbelievable.
50-ounce bat, which is just like 8 ounces more than most everybody uses. Okay.
He would hit 2 irons. It would be, and Frank Howard did the same thing, by the way. Matter of fact, there's an old story. I don't know if it's true or not, that a ball went up the middle off Frank Howard's bat, and the pitcher ducked, and it ended up in the center field bleachers. That's how Frank Howard did.
Exactly how Dick Allen. I remember sitting in the stands in '72, and back then, you remember,
Harry.
Center field was 445 to the horns in center field at Old Comiskey Park, and I was sitting to the left of that with a friend of mine in the 3rd row, and we had to duck from one of Dick Allen's line drives that came scorching over our heads by only a row and just tore into one of the wooden areas on the seats. It was just unbelievable. It looked like a torpedo that was being dropped.
All right, so I'm going to add on to what Harry said. Yes, Dick Allen did hit the 2 inside the park home runs in one game. It was against, well, I don't even want to tell you. It was against a very, I think he's a Hall of Fame pitcher. If not, he's should have been a Hall of Fame pitcher. Who was it? Both home runs.
Let's see. What year was it?
4, maybe 75.
I want to. No, I think it would have been 72. I'll if I tell you the team, I think you'll get it, but I'll tell you the team. Minnesota.
Recent Hall of Famer.
I'm not sure, Bruce. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe. Great curveball.
Great curveball. Levine.
That's correct.
Bert Blyleven was pitching in 1972.
Bert Blyleven. He had 2 inside the park in one game. I don't know if that's ever been done before or after, come to think of it. I don't think it has. Harry's looking it up, I think.
Nope, not looking it up. I was just communicating with somebody. My apologies.
Okay.
But I didn't know that Bert Blyleven pitched in 72. My Lord, did that man have a long career.
It sounds a little early, but I think he started pitching pretty young.
I could be off by the year.
He was born in 1950, so
yeah,
it could have been 73 or 74. You know.
Yep.
Yep.
All right.
Anyway, I'm out of trivia questions. I could do this all night, Bruce. We could talk about everything under the sun in regards to baseball, but anyway, I've kept you long enough. I do appreciate you joining us. And listen, Bruce, I hope baseball gets its blank together here because we need it. We need it in Chicago. That's for damn sure.
Well, I need it too personally because I want to be able to continue to talk baseball with the great listeners on the Score every Saturday, along with David Haw, and writing on our website and covering games with you, David. I mean, we've been doing it this will be my 40th year. You've been doing it, I think, 43 or 44. So, we have to keep that going. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, and Bruce, I don't know if Harry had a chance to pass on the hello to you from a very well, go ahead, Harry. Say hello to Bruce through somebody else.
Let me guess who it is. Give me a hint, and then I'll.
Okay, I'm going to tell you who it was. He was part of the white flag trade back in the I'd say mid '90s, and can you name the players that were traded from the White Sox in the mid '90s when the White Sox were trailing the Cleveland Indians at the midpoint of the season by 3 or 3.5 games?
Roberto Hernandez.
Yes, sir. Roberto and I have been buddies now for a very long time. As a matter of fact, I was talking to him and he's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm in the middle of trying to get this show produced." And I says, "Bruce Levine." I says, "The name rings a bell because I've been down in Florida for so long. I mean, I follow quite a few different careers up there." And he goes, "Bruce? Really? Bruce?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "You got to tell him I said hello. He always said that you were the consummate interview." He told me a quick story after he got traded to the San Francisco Giants that he had to take a red-eye flight with Wilson Alvarez and who was the other pitcher?
Danny Darwin.
Yeah, Danny Darwin. And they had to take a red-eye to Cincinnati. From Cincinnati, they flew to Montreal, and from Montreal, they came into Chicago to play the Cubs. And you, my friend, were the very first reporter to go in there to actually talk to him. And he literally remembers the interview and the questions that you had asked. He said you were the consummate pro and gentleman. Loved you both, actually, but he made some serious comments about you.
Be sure to say hi to Roberto. He's one of my favorite people of all time. And he has a fascinating story. We can get into it some other time maybe, but his career was almost over before it began, and he ended up pitching almost, I think, 18 or 19 years. He pitched for a long time. He still was throwing 95 at age 40. I mean, he was an amazing guy and just one of the nicest people you'd ever meet.
And guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, Harry, but I still think he owns both team records for the White Sox and the Rays for career saves. Pretty good, pretty darn good.
He had 167 saves, I believe, with the White Sox, and I think 104 or 105. He had 320 plus saves, if I'm not mistaken, in his entire career. He made I don't remember how many All-Star games he made, but real quick story for you. It's funny. I was on a different platform and we were doing a pregame show for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers down here. And it was at a place called the Deck Bar and Grill here in St. Petersburg, overlooking the water. It's beautiful. And he's like, "Yeah, I'll come out." So he comes out and he's wearing his White Sox hat and he's hanging out with me. And we're in the outside. We're having a nice shot and we're just shooting the crap around. And he hands me his baseball. It's the very last ball that he ever thrown in the major leagues. I have it. So I'm walking him to his car. Here's a true story. I take the baseball, I leave it on the table. We're walking. He keeps looking back and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "What are you doing, Roberto?" He goes, "You're going to leave my ball sitting there?" I was like, "It's just yours, man. Don't worry about it. No one's going to take it."
Wow.
He lost it. He absolutely
Good
lost
guy.
it. But I
Good
was
guy.
kidding. Very good man. Very, very good man. Great family too.
Real good guy.
Trivia question: did you know that
Hey,
Ozzie
Bruce.
Guillen is the godfather to both his children?
I did not know that.
Yep.
I did not. I'm not surprised though. Two of my favorite people in the world. Guys, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Hey, Bruce, thanks a lot for joining us, and I hope to see you somewhere real soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
See you, Bruce. Thanks
All right,
for
you
coming
too.
on.
All right, everybody who's still listening in, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon. Harry, again, appreciate your help, of course, as always.
Oh, without question. Thank you so much for having me on. I'll go ahead and find it. Take care, everybody. Good night.